Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Boccia England's Boccia Beach webinar, Clubs and Safeguarding for Clubs and Groups. This is the third in our Boccia Beach webinar series, which aims to support member clubs with a safe and sustainable return to Boccia, both on and off the court. For this webinar, I'm pleased to be joined by Brendan Tonks from the NSPCC Safeguarding in Sport Unit. Safeguarding in Sport, Child Protect in Sport Unit.
Evening, everyone.
Over the next hour, we will be providing an overview of safeguarding and Boccia England safeguarding policies and procedures. At the end of the webinar, you will also be asked to be able to ask Brendan or I any questions that you may have relating to safeguarding. Before we make a start on this webinar, I would just like to go through a few ground rules. So please keep your mic muted and cameras off during the presentation. After the presentation, you'll be asked to turn all cameras on and mute yourself if you would like to ask a question. If you would like to use the chat function now to introduce yourself, please do so, and it would be great to hear what clubs we have on the call. And if you require any support throughout the webinar, please drop me or Brendan a message in the chat box, and we'll do our best to support. And finally, this webinar is being recorded for Boccia England's YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be on the recording, please keep all cameras turned off throughout the whole webinar. We want to make this webinar interactive for you as possible. Therefore, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Brendan will answer as many questions at the end. So moving on to introduction. My name is George and I'm the Development Officer for Club and Safeguarding at Boccia England, having been in post since December 2019. Part of my role is also to be the lead safeguarding officer here at Boccia England. I'm also joined by Brendan Tonks, who is one of the senior consultants at the NSPCC Child Protect in the Sport Unit. I'll now pass it over to Brendan, who will introduce himself further and take it over the next part of the webinar. So over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, George. So, evening, everyone. As George said, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or just shout out or raise your hand if you are experienced with Zoom and know how to use the different functions. I'm not great on Zoom, so I'll apologise immediately, but I will try my best, so bear with me. I've got George helping me with the slides as we go through, and I'll try not to say next slide, please, too much. Next slide, please, George. So these are just a few of the ground rules, which, and I'm sure you hear these time after time after time, but it's just to make sure that we have sort of an effective and open and honest sort of group experience. So if everyone wants to participate, be brave. There's no silly questions, there's no silly comments, and the reason we're all here is to sort of learn off of each other. This is, and if everyone sits quietly and listens to me, we'll have a few people falling asleep. Respect everybody, you know each other, what we've got to say. We all come from different backgrounds and experiences. And look, there's going to be a lot of distractions. We're coming into the evening, so people will have family members coming in and out, cats, dogs, children, Amazon, all of these things. You have your phones and emails going. Just try your best, discreetly deal with things as we go along. But don't feel pressured. If there's something, if there's an emergency in the background, just discreetly go and deal with it and then come back on. and we'll soldier through. In terms of confidentiality, I'm please ask that everything we discuss throughout this training session, especially when we come on to some scenarios within my piece in a few minutes, is kept within the room, the virtual room. If there are any concerns that you think that you kind of highlight as you go through the course, I'll stay on for a few minutes at the end, and I'll also share my email address, and you'll have George's details as well. So if there's anything that comes out of this training that you are particularly worried about, don't go away tonight and really stressed about it by yourselves. I've deliberately factored in some time at the end if anyone's got anything they want to speak about privately. And we'll be dealing with some sensitive content. So if anybody at any time is struggling or they need a break, again, just discreetly, camera off. And if you have to leave the call because you're not feeling great or particularly upset, if you wouldn't mind just dropping privately George or I a message just to let us know that you're going and that you're fine, and then George could probably follow that up with you tomorrow or the next few days. Okay. Do you have the next slide, George? In terms of introductions, I just wanted to explain a little bit. I wanted to explain a little bit about the Child Protection and Sport Unit, so that people see where this fits in with England Boccia and Boccia England and yourselves as clubs. So the Child Protection and Sport Unit is part of the NSPCC charity, and we do what it says on the tin. We're the sort of child protection team focused on sports. We're actually funded by Sport England, who fund all of the major national governing bodies, which includes Boccia England. And our role is to provide training and support and consultancy for the likes of George and the lead safeguard officers and safeguarding teams across the different sports. But what we also do, there's also other sections of work we do. So if you go into our website, which I'll provide at the end, there's different areas. So there's like a parents hub where you can direct or signpost any of your parents, and we've got like an e-learning course on there specifically for parents, and we've got sections with information specifically for clubs as well. So whilst our primary role is to support the national governing bodies, we do work on a lot of content and resources for clubs and parents, and we're moving into this sort of young people sector as well at the minute now. You can probably read a little bit about myself. That's from we've got a Meet the Team page on the website, but my background's in child protection social work. I'm absolutely crazy about all sports, and having a wheelchair using disabled daughter at home, I'm particularly interested in this sort of sector, especially with Boccia England and lots of other sort of disability and more inclusive sports. And you'll see I'm on the board for a charity which is to do with inclusive sports as well. So that's sort of a little bit about myself, but let's get on to the content. Should we go to the next slide, George? Thank you. So, look, it's late in the evening. We're all going to be quite tired. I've got my coffee boost here. I'm sure everybody else has got a drink that will help them in hand. So I'm going to keep it to my section to 4 main areas. I'm just going to do, it says a quiz. There's only 5 little questions just to warm us up and get us using the Zoom functions. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what harm to children in sport. So as club welfare officers or club leads or whatever roles you're in, what should you be expecting or looking out for, or what may you experience within those roles? From compliance to culture. So this is a reflective piece, really. I'll explain more as we go through it, but where are you as a club? Are you complying with the minimum requirements to be safe, or are you going out, you know, above and beyond and bringing safeguarding to life within your club? And then finally, there's a really useful piece on children and adult safeguarding. So we're just going to explore the differences and similarities, because while safeguarding in principle is very similar with children and adults, there's some real key differences. And I know from within your sport as well, you've got a lot of young people going through transitioning into adulthood and lots of adult members. So you need to kind of know the differences and what to do if concerns arise. So should we go first? We'll come on to it's a short true or false quiz. So we've got true on the left column, false on the right. I'm happy, however you want to feed this back. So however you feel most comfortable, you can either shout out the answer. You could use, if you know Zoom, if you go to the top, tell me if I'm wrong, George, it says view options, and you can go down 4 drops and it says annotate. And if you do that, you can tick or put smiley face or write your name or do whatever you want. But we just need to know from you all whether you think this is true or false. So the first question is, children are abused mostly by strangers. So let's try and get an answer off everybody in one form or another. Do you think it's true or false? Just give a couple more seconds in case people are just figuring bits out. So I think everybody's replied false, which is the correct answer. So most children are abused by somebody they know, whether that's family, friends, or some sort of close relation. So the second question. It is only men who sexually abuse children. Oh, there's some fast trigger fingers here. Look at those coming in on the chat and on the screen. And yeah, again, you've all got the correct answer, which is that's false. So whilst I think in terms of figures, there's significantly more reports of abuse by men. Women also abuse children. And then an often sort of left out category is child abuse by children on children as well. So it's important to remember it's not always adults on children, it can be children on children, especially if we're looking at the 16, 17-year-olds. You know, so the definition of a child is anyone under 18. So we've got that, you know, anything under there. Question 3. Disabled children are more likely to be victims of abuse. What do we think on that? Fantastic, we've got a few ticks in the true box. Excuse me. So yeah, that's true. So what we're talking about with child protection and safeguarding, we're talking about the children's vulnerabilities and the likely targets of perpetrators of abuse. So that's kind of a toxic mix. So we've got the perpetrators who will be looking for vulnerabilities, and disabled children are, and it's a quite broad statement, but traditionally are likely to have more vulnerabilities. Question 4. Girls and boys are equally likely to be abused. What do people think about that? People will notice me looking right. I've got a second screen where the chat is, so I'm not just distracted by what's going out the window, by the way. Well, this is a divisive one. I think we've got almost half and half, true and false. So the question was, girls and boys are equally likely to be abused. This is a tough one. So in terms of any kind of abuse, the answer is true. They are likely to experience some form of abuse. However, when we look at the different categories of abuse, Boys are more likely to be physically abused or be subject to neglect, whereas girls are more likely to be sexually abused. Again, these are sort of just huge generalizations, but in terms of the broad statistics, that's where we are. And the final question, children quickly recover quickly from abuse. Yeah, I can see the everybody's going straight to false of that. And of course, because the impacts of abuse can be lifelong on children. So it depends on obviously what they've experienced, but in terms of their resilience as well, some children can recover fairly quickly, but largely depending on the abuse, it can be a lifelong sort of trauma and impact on them.
Thanks.
Okay, so harm to young athletes in sport. So when we're talking about athletes, the definition of athletes in this sense, we're talking about anyone who's, you know, if we put it into Boccia terms, perhaps sort of 4 or 5, all the way up to the age of 17. The observant ones of you may have looked at the next slide for a few answers. So what we're going to ask you is just in terms, so within your different roles, lots of you will have done safeguarding training, perhaps there's safeguarding protecting children by UK Coaching, or the Time to Listen as a club welfare officer, and lots of the training involves what are the categories of abuse. So if we look at the 4 categories of abuse to children, it's physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. But what I wanted us to do is to look a little bit deeper at what kind of harm do you think children who are coming in and out of your clubs may suffer, and that's not limited to at the hands of your club, but just in their world, all around them. What might the children be experiencing in terms of harm within your clubs? So I'll put a couple of ideas down first. I'll throw some ideas out first. Again, put it in the chat, just shout at me, or put it on the screen. But something that's been in the news recently is of domestic abuse. So there could be there could be a victim of domestic abuse, and that could be they could be physically hit by parents, during altercations, or the emotional impact of that. Has anyone else got any ideas of any kind of harm that children may suffer? Oh yeah, I've seen Gemma's put bullying. That's a brilliant one, and that goes back. That can quite frequently go back to the sort of peer-on-peer, child-on-child abuse, but it can also be adult-on-child as well. So bullying's a really interesting one as well, and I think probably one of the harder ones for you to deal with, because you have these horrible words such as banter, and you get like rivalry and banter, and then at what point is it defined as bullying, and the impact severe enough to define as abuse? So yeah, bullying's a really good one. Malnourished, that's a good one, Georgina. Yeah. We've got a few coming through. Mental abuse from family peers. Does anyone want to be brave and explain what they were thinking when they put their answers in the chat? No, don't worry about that. Oh, Sandra, sorry, are you? I just think you're muted, Sandra. Sorry, that's why we didn't know.
It's my fault.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, just abuse from family. I mean, just because a lot of disabled kids particularly can't do things, they don't live up to people's expectations, and life can be very frustrating for everybody. Yeah. And brothers and sisters and everybody else, and also definitely at school quite often with their peer group, like their age group. Sometimes they get on much better with older people or younger people because they can't do what everybody else can do. So that's quite hard, and I think they can get quite, but goes with the bullying as well. There's quite a lot, I think, of that people suffer.
Yeah. Sandra, it's a really good point you've made, about when you said the word frustration, because should we jump on to the next slide, George? Because this is a really good sort of point that we're going to make with this slide, is that not all forms of abuse are deliberate acts. They're not all conscious, malicious, deliberate acts. And Sandra's hit a really important point there, and it's pertinent to me, as a parent of quite a severely disabled girl. Frustration is a real problem, and you know, the young people are frustrated, like you said, parents are frustrated. But even within the sports, you know, coaches may become frustrated, you know, and you know, their peers may become frustrated because the broad range of abilities within the groups are so varied. So I think that was a really good sort of transition to this slide. So you'll see on here, I've categorized it into sort of 3 groups. So I've put individual, and what I meant by individual is that this may not necessarily be caused by anyone else, but it may be a product of something else that they're experiencing. So it may or may not be. So, but we've got sort of injuries, depression, self-harm, eating disorders, and disordered eating. I'm not sure why I put them like that. Anyway, so these are things which, although it may not be something experienced due to something experienced at your club or at home, and you may not be able to put your finger on what the cause is, it's sometimes important just to look at what the outcome is and what the harm is on the child.
What's hazing?
Hazing is it's like an initiation. It's like initiation things.
Oh, right.
So yeah, so oh goodness, I'm just thinking years back. So it can be something really awful. It can be to drink something. It could be to do a sexual act on something, on somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? As part of the new group, yes, and it's basically, I think it's aimed to sort of humiliate and something. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah. So the relational one, this is where there's, as it says, relation with somebody. So this may be a relationship with a coach, a team manager, a volunteer. It could be with a parent. It could be with a sibling. It could be with another peer within the team. So this is the impact of another person, you know, and the impact of a relationship on that young person. And then organisational, these are the ones which, you know, as clubs or event organisers or Georgia's national governing body, Lead Safeguard, want to bear in mind that these things aren't happening, you know, on your watch. So as it says there, you've got abuse and spectators. The cultures which normalise abuse. So I'll give you an example in a different sport. Until last year, it was completely normal in swimming to weigh in, to publicly weigh children on poolside as part of their training programme. So you'd have, you know, 10, 11, 12-year-old girls who were extremely conscious about their bodies and going through changes, put on poolside and publicly weighed and announced their, you know, their weights. And it was only until last year that stopped. And the impact on these young girls is, you know, tremendous. But that's this culture. It was just normal. It was just normal within the sport. It's always happened. So obviously it can't be harmful. So that's a good example of just sort of these cultures, which just because it's always been happening, we need to question ourselves and question ourselves again. So within your clubs, you'll be looking at your organisational things in terms of how you run the club. You'll be looking at the relational aspects of abuse. So you'll be looking out for indicators of these sort of abuses happening between young people and other young people or adults, or in whatever role. Or it may be that you just notice these just individual indicators, you know, that someone made, you know, that their appearance, they've just come across a really low mood for a long period of time, and something, you just feel something's changed. You know, at that point, that's when you should probably just, you know, just ask the questions. Just ask the question. What's going on? Is there anything you can help with? Has anyone got any questions about the kinds of harm that may happen to children within the clubs? If you have, feel free to put anything in the chat at any point or raise your hand. I'll try and keep an eye on everything, but do shout out if you think I've missed you, don't worry. So, George, should we go to the next slide? So in this quick section, I just wanted to think about, we call it compliance in the Child Protection Support Unit. We call this the movement from compliance to culture. So from complying with minimum requirements, and that would be, you know, I've got a safeguarding policy, so we're obviously safe, to really good practice, you know, having a safe culture around the club. And I'm going to send a copy of the slides. Oh, George has got a copy of my slides already. So if anyone wants these, please take this away, because I intended this slide here to be more of a bit of a reflective piece. So you can go away, have a look at these, and almost do a mini self-assessment. So where am I? Where are we as a club on this table? So if you're non-compliant and you haven't got your policies and your staff don't know that there is a policy or any of these things, then you can action that fairly quickly. And George and I think and Kate and the team at Boccia England will be more than happy to help you. And also on the Child Protection Support Unit on our website, we've got templates as well. So there's lots of options to get that in place fairly quickly. And once you've done that, that's where you'll probably be at minimal compliance. And I think this is where lots of sports and lots of clubs have been for a long time. So we've got the Child Protection Support Unit. We've been saying to the Georges of the world, you need to make sure that all the clubs have got a policy in place. And the Georges go to all the sports and say, clubs, we really recommend you need to have a policy in place. And then that's where it's ended. And we've just been, no one's really been asking, so what are you doing with the policy? What are you doing with the good practice guidance? Or, you know, and what next? What are you doing to really make sure that it's effective safeguarding and not just a tokenistic policy on a wall somewhere, or a hidden place on the website which no one knows where it is, and it's written in language it's so difficult to understand that even myself I wouldn't know what they are talking about. Never mind, you know, a parent of someone who has got no understanding of terminology and safeguarding. So where we want to be at this sort of effective safeguarding culture area. And I'm really conscious that's not easy. It's really easy for me to say go and have a really good safeguarding culture, but in practice it is really, really difficult. I'm the chairperson of my local Lincoln fishing club of about 800 members. So I share the difficult, I know how hard this is, because I mention the word and I get all these people rolling their eyes. What are you talking about? You know, just let us go fishing. So it's about how can we do it? And I've just put a couple of notes down, just some ideas that I think can just bring it to life a little bit. And again, I know this sounds easy, but it's just to get us the ball rolling perhaps. But I think the single most important thing is that open discussions, in public open discussions, whether that's open forums or, you know, at events, and asking the question, you know, with everybody present, how are you? Is everything all right? Would you know what to do? You know, if you're at an event and there's some juniors and you're on a break, how's the event going? How have you performed today? We've updated some safeguarding stuff. Would you even know where to go if you've got a concern? So just bring it to life and have those discussions. In terms of more on the organisational, sort of the back room approach, just make sure it's a regular item on every agenda, whatever your meeting is. So if you've got a meeting about your entry into an event, just make sure it's on the agenda. So how have we made sure everything we're doing is safe? How we're going to, it's about that, the travel there, while they're there, medicine, you know, and it's probably the things you already do. People will do this without noticing. It's built in because everyone, I imagine you are so experienced in your roles, you know, within your sport, and you probably do this without thinking, but it's about reflecting on why you're doing it and bringing it to life. So, and recording what you're doing and why, and making it a real part of the system of the club, rather than just one person's experience or job. And then I touched on this at the beginning, but you know, really good signposting and support, you know, and information sharing. So like I said, don't have it on in a remote, obscure part of the website where no one will find it, because I think in the NSPCC, the information team who run the website always tell me that there's this rule. I think it's 3 clicks or something tolerance. If someone can't find something in 3 clicks, they'll stop looking for it. I think it's 3. So yeah, but the point is, so if people can't find it readily, they're not going to find it. So you need to make sure it's there. And if it's on your front page of your club or your handbook or your website, or it's got prime position on the door as you walk in, it's going to be visible and live and in people's minds all the time. Has anyone got any good examples of practices they're doing which they think is improving their cultures, their sort of safeguarding culture in the clubs? Or has anyone got any questions about what they'd like to do moving forwards? No, that's fine. I just checked the chat. So, like I said, that was more this sort of piece was. I just wanted to give you something to do, to go away and reflect on where you think you may be as a club, and you can create some smaller action plans that, you know, things that you like to do, or if you're doing things really well, pat yourself on the back, because like I said, I think a lot of people do this without knowing why they're doing it. And then next, we're going to jump on to the difference between adults and children. So how I'm going to do this, I'm just going to, there's a list which George is putting up now. I'm just going to touch on a couple of these, the similarities. And then we're going to ask for you to tell me some differences. So I'll pre-warn you. So I explained earlier, the definition of a child by law is under 18. There's some differences, I think, in terms of the local authority provision of resources. If they're disabled, it might be up to 25. But for this, we're going to talk about the definition as 18 or under. So look, the principles of safeguarding are the same. You know, within the sport, you want everybody to be able to participate and be happy in the sport, turn up to your clubs, turn up to events, you know, without the fear of abuse or neglect as well. And it's everyone's responsibility to safeguard, you know, everyone within your club. And I was talking to George earlier today about it. Do you know, about a really good analogy is, it sounds a bit tacky, but, you know, if you think of your sports club as a family, the responsibility isn't put on the children to approach the adults and say, what should I do if I'm worried about something? There should already be, you know, a built-in sort of system of trust and these relationships where the children know who they should tell. You know, from a very young age, children should know that they'll go to their mum and dad within this family. I can go to mum and dad or my older brother or whoever else if I'm worried about something, and it's okay to talk about it. And that's that sort of culture I was talking about in the previous slide, that your aspiration is that anybody, child or adult, within your club just knows that without having to second think it, it's okay to talk about these things. It's about okay to ask questions if they're unsure, and they know immediately who to go to. And this is the way everyone's got a duty to respond to concerns about adults and children. So even if someone doesn't come to you and you see something, you know, or something's reported, it's not easy to do the right thing. It's really not. Sometimes it would be far easier to turn a blind eye or assume the best. We can't afford to do it. We've got a duty, to everyone in your club, not to assume the best, and equally not to assume the worst all the time, but just to ask and explore. We talked earlier about abuse being more common by someone they know in children. That's the same with adults. And there's repeatedly a power imbalance with the abused and the abuser, which is quite obvious, I think. When there's often more than one type of abuse taking place. And in terms of the legal requirements, wherever you live, whichever county you live in, the local authority should have a safeguarding partnership for children and adults as well. I think now a lot of them are actually joined up now, but there should be a provision for both. So that's these similarities. Now what we're going to do is, if anyone can just pop in the chat, or again shout out, or even use the Zoom annotating function, just give me some ideas of what you think the differences might be between safeguarding adults and children. Now, I've already said that one is 18 and under, and one's under 18, one's 18 and above, so you can't put that on. Has anyone got any ideas about what the differences might be? I'll just give people a couple of minutes to have a quick think, put something in the chat. Or if you've got no idea, just put no idea. That's fine as well. So I think we're pretty silent on the chat, so I assume people are struggling, I think. Oh, a few have come through. Yes, so Georgina, we've got children might not understand its abuse. That's true. We could also, do you know what, that could probably be a similarity as well, because some of the adults may not understand its abuse as well. Angela's got child and parent.
What I meant by that was probably it could be at the club, you'd have a child and the parent, and it's sometimes quite difficult for one to come forward if there could be a problem. That could be at home.
Yeah. I've got one from David. There are some types of abuse more likely to be experienced by adults. Financial abuse, coercive behaviour, for example. That's brilliant, David. Shall we put the answers up, George? So the most obvious one is first. It's just different legislation that underpins the safeguarding practices. So we've got the Children Act, and then I'll hold my hands up and say whatever the adult one is. It's probably a good time. Actually, you'll see at the bottom of the screen on the bottom left, it says the Anne Craft Trust. So the Child Protection in Sport Unit at the NSPCC, we are the Child Protection in Sport Unit, and the Anne Craft Trust, excuse me, they are the equivalent for adult safeguarding in sports. So we do a lot of work together with the Anne Craft Trust as well. So I use this slide for board training and lots of things, and when we co-deliver. So what would normally happen is I'd do the similarities and would have a adult safeguarding expert run through and tell us what the legislation is and what the 10 categories of abuse are for adults. I can tell you there are differences, but I'm not an expert, in the adult safeguarding side. But the Anne Craft Trust is fantastic. And again, they're pretty much like, they work in the same way as the Child Protection in Sport Unit. So they work with the Georges and the national governing bodies, but they've got loads of club information and resources on their website too. So like David said, the categories of abuse for adults, I think it's 10. Well, it's always, they always say there's 10, and there's financial abuse, all sorts of different things. And this is the key, this is the absolute key difference. And I really struggle to get my head around this, but that's because my background's with children. So with children, we have an absolute duty to report everything. If there's any abuse towards a child, we have an absolute duty to report it and safeguard them. With adults, they have the right to remain in an unsafe situation if they have capacity. And that really, so when I've done training and they've gone, and the Anne Craft Trust go through some scenarios and explain what that means, it makes me feel sick in the stomach, honestly, about the sort of scenarios which adults are allowed to be left in if they meet this capacity assessment. And that's what this sort of safeguarding is done with adults, with their consent and collaboration. It's not done to them. And that is, safeguarding is effectively done to children. We safeguard them. there's no LADO, that's the local authority designated officer. For adult safeguarding, it's just adult social care. So for those who are unfamiliar or forgotten, the LADO is it's a local authority, normally social work background officer who works with, investigates and sort of coordinates assessments of people who are working with children or volunteering with children. So that if there's a concern about a coach or a volunteer, or anyone who's in regulated activity as part of that DBS assessment, the report, that should be always reported to the LADO. And this is quite obvious, having gone through that, the procedures for reporting abuse and handling cases are not the same. And that goes down to this sort of consent and working in collaboration with an adult, whereas we safeguard children. When we talk about children, though, we have got children who are, you know, by law, sort of 14, 15, 16 and 17. And that becomes real tricky because, you know, they're young adults, aren't they? Well, they think they are. But, you know, at that sort of age, they very, very much will know their own mind. And I know from my background in child protection social work, I was a court-based social worker, that actually, the court, you know, within the systems, they really want to listen to these children, but ultimately, by law, they are safeguarded. So despite any protests by 15 or 16-year-olds, you just have to, you know, sort of sincerely and sensitively explain that you've got a duty to report it. There's no two ways about it. I'm just looking on the chat, I've got a note from David. It's worth noting, despite the right to stay unsafe, it should not deter people from reporting. That's a really, really good point, David, is that whilst we work with consent and collaboration within safeguarding adults, at this, especially at your point where you're likely to be the point of identification, or someone's reported something, or you've observed, or there's been someone's shared concerns, it's not your role at that point to make a decision or not whether they're going to give consent. I think, like David's point is, get that reported in, because there's absolutely there's no sort of law or rules to stop you reporting. But once they're adult social care or the police, if anyone gets involved in that point, that's when there has to be a more collaborative approach. Feel free to jump in, David, unless you're happy you think I've just covered that.
No, I'm going to say, Brendan, thank you. Absolutely, you've covered it more than there.
Yeah, brilliant. That's good. So has anyone got any questions about the differences and similarities? And I just wonder if anyone else has the same uncomfortable feelings about, you know, with the adult safeguarding. I'm not sure what people's backgrounds are. Or, has anyone got any thoughts on this part?
Can I ask you about the term vulnerable adult? So within this, would it be then, you'd say that that's somebody that is deemed to have capacity? Would that how you would?
Angela, I'll have to probably just say I'm really sorry, and I could haze a guess, but I wouldn't want to, you know, give you the wrong information.
Yeah.
If you, I'm sure, even if we just went onto the Handcraft Trust website, these definitions would be on there.
Okay.
I think a vulnerable adult and capacity may be intertwined, but also could be separate things. So, because I know that the capacity comes down to, you know, sort of mental capacity act and assessments, whereas vulnerabilities may be down to other things. And the other thing is, vulnerabilities can be far ranging. You can be financially vulnerable. And actually, it's important to remember, vulnerabilities are sort of, you know, malleable, and they can change over time. You know, someone's mental health deterioration, or, you know, their resilience to things, or their physical health, financial situations, these things can fluctuate. So vulnerabilities are very much, you know, sort of unstable dangers. So yeah, I hope I answered that, Angela, but maybe go to the Handcraft Trust. I'm sorry I can't just give you a definitive definition.
Thanks.
Has anyone else got any questions or comments on that?
No, just an observation, really, Brendan. There's a lot of terminology in here that might be quite intimidating to people in terms of referral to social services and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Having been involved in this field for quite a number of years now, I can assure you that it's a really supportive process in terms of referring, in terms of chatting through your concerns with adult social care or with the local safeguarding board and so on. They're there to support and help, and absolutely no inquiry or no queries is deemed to be too insignificant. It's certainly the referrals I've made over the years have always been received very gratefully, and it may come to nothing. But the general rule that we've always trained people on is if it doesn't look right or doesn't seem right, refer anyway and let somebody else make the decision.
Yeah, thank you. Dave is right. He should probably be co-delivering with me, but I think Dave is absolutely right. I don't want to tread on George's toes, because I know he's going to cover a little bit of this later, but in terms of referrals, David's spot on. If you ring up any of the statutory services, so if it's children's social care, adult social care, if you call the police, the safeguarding board, the LADO, people will just want to know what you've got to say. That they're trained in getting the right information out of you as well. So if you're not sure what to do, or you're not sure what you should be telling them, just ring up and they will help you through the process. And George is there as well. Part of the national governing body's sort of responsibilities, sorry George, is to support you through that. So if you're not sure and you're desperately uncomfortable, contact George. And if you want to speak to somebody independent of the sport as well, so if it's about somebody within the sport and you're worried, because I know with lots of sports everybody knows everybody, and you might just think, I wish I could speak to someone independently, then you can call the NSPCC helpline. And if you say it's about sport, they'll put you through to one of the consultants within my team. So we run a duty system every Tuesday and Thursday where any sport inquiries come through. You can come through to us, and the Handcraft Trust will do the same as well. Yeah, Sandra. Yeah, so most people in the club are vulnerable adults, so it needs to be the Handcraft Trust. Yeah, and I'm sure the Handcraft Trust, they aren't as heavily resourced as us, but they do offer the same support where they can. So I think that my point is, like Dave said, everybody's here to help. And if the other thing is, I don't know how well you know each other on the call, share each other's details, because you probably experience the same things, you know, through different stages. So have a peer-on-peer chat about it as well. Shall we move on to the final slide, George? I'm just conscious of time. I don't want to hog all of George's time. So what I wanted to do, I just wanted to throw a couple of examples up on this scale here. And on the left, just get to my notes. So on the left, we've got low-level concerns and poor practice. So this is we're looking at things that may be unintentional. So poor practices in the coaches at meeting the nutritional needs or the medical needs of a child, all the way through to the worst abuse you can imagine. So grooming or sexual abuse or physical beating of a child on the far right. And I'm just going to put I'll throw a couple of scenarios out there, and if you can just put a tick or write your name, or you could write it in the chat, however you want to feedback, or shout at me where you think along the scale it is. And please don't be worried about this. It's one of those annoying things where there's no right or wrong answer. It's just to spark a little bit of conversation. So the first one is, I'll put it in the chat, just bear with me. Oh my goodness, so sorry. Here we are. So a child has told you that another child in the club is dating an adult coach. So whereabouts on this scale, so if a child's just come up to you in whatever role it is you've got at the club, or they've told another member of the club who's come to you, and they've gone, well, I can't even make up the names. One child said to another child that one of the child is dating an adult coach, and by definition of child, we're talking under 18. Whereabouts do we think it is? Brilliant. So we've got a few ticks already across on the far end of the right towards the abuse section. And thanks, Gemma, for putting that in the chat. So Angela's put it's a difficult one. They're all quite difficult in this, Angela. Does anyone want to explain why they think it is where it is? Angela, what are your thoughts on it being a difficult one?
Well, I put it there right back to the top of abuse because, you know, it is. But then part of me is thinking that the child could be making it up as well.
Yeah.
But my first concern would be where they went.
Yeah. Oh, so simply, so it's the difficult, just the report's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of along the spectrum, I mean, this is a criminal offence. If people are interested more, do you know, in the it's called the Close the Loophole campaign, which was an NSPCC campaign to make it illegal for coaches to have relationships with 16, 17 and 18 year olds, 16 and 17 year olds. That's going to be passed by law soon, but oh, sorry, I'm just getting a message from George. Right, I'll do one more, and then we'll jump onto George's part. Okay, so for the next one, I'll just clear that, the final one, and then we'll jump over to George. I'm sorry for taking over, George. We've got a coach who doesn't intervene when he hears a child being subjected to racial abuse because all the children are laughing, including the child who's been subject to the comments. So we've got a group of children and the coach doesn't intervene whilst it's happening. What are people's thoughts on that? Are we low-level concerns, poor practice? Are we somewhere across the middle, or is this serious abuse?
I think this could very easily escalate into something else if it isn't dealt with swiftly and positively.
Yeah, and like I said, these are quite deliberately some of those sort of annoying questions where you never know enough to make a really clear just sort of answer or assessment on the situation. But so we've got a coach, he doesn't intervene as he's hearing this happening. Now, if this comes back to you, do you know, within the club, I think the point of this is before we react and make sort of, you know, assessments in our mind of this, of what's happened or judgments, just ask questions. Because whilst the report was at that time, someone said that he didn't intervene at that point, we don't know what else has happened. We don't know if something's been done in private afterwards. So I think just my point on that one is always ask questions. Just ask before you make any judgments, because what's reported to you, it's not always black and white and clear, is it? But in terms of if that was correct, of course, you've got a real problem there because it needs to have been dealt with swiftly. But look, that's my final slide. Oh no, George, you just put on the final slide, and then I'll hand over to George. So the couple of questions for you to go away with was just, so as a club, do you have the necessary policies in place? So that's that compliance area. Do you have a good safeguarding culture? How are you bringing it to life? And what could you do to do that further? And as a club, would you know what to do if somebody reported one of these concerns, such as the couple that we've just reported? Would you know what to do if somebody came to you with that? Thank you very much for bearing with me. Thank you for engaging. And I'll have all my details at the end for you. And I look forward to hearing from George. Thanks all.
Thanks, Brendan, for putting that in the chat. And I think that brings me to the end of the webinar. And that's everything for me. Thank you for attending this part of this webinar. Tonight, I hope you found it useful, and I hope you enjoyed attending this evening. And thanks, Brendan, for that really interesting presentation on the safeguarding. It was great to see.